Hi, I'm Mayor Jay Tiptraining, and welcome to this edition of Chandler Inside Now. Today, our guest in studio is County Recorder Adrian Fontes. County Recorder Fontes, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Mr. Mayor.
We're going to talk a lot about your office, the County Recorder's office, what it does, what it doesn't do, and some of those things about the office. But I think before we delve into the County Recorder, I want to let the folks get a little taste and a little feel for your background,
Sure.
how you actually got to where you were. But let's start with, you're a veteran of the Marine Corps, so maybe let's start there. What got you into the military, and how long did you serve, and what have you?
It's a great story. I was in my very early 20s, and I had been at Arizona State, and I did what a lot of Sun Devils did. And I recognized that I needed some discipline in my life. And so I had actually been working at a private high school up in the Sedona area. And I enlisted because I just knew that I needed some of that. And so I went and enlisted out of Prescott, as a matter of fact. And
This is after you had graduated from ASU.
No, as a matter of fact, I had left ASU
Right.
because of, my poor performance,
Right.
frankly. It was sort of a little bit of redemption. I'd gotten myself into a little, youthful exuberance, let's
Yeah,
say. And so
happens.
I went to the Marine Corps, and boy, they straightened me up real well. And I got married while I was in the service. And we're still married. It's almost 25 years now.
Yeah.
So I'm indebted greatly to my Corps.
Semper Fi.
Thank you.
My dad was a Marine,
No kidding.
World War II.
Right
So
on.
it goes back a ways. But yeah, he was a
Yeah.
Marine in the Pacific.
No kidding.
Yeah,
Did he see any action?
he did.
They had to have. If
Yeah.
he was in the Pacific, there was
Yeah.
a lot of action
A
out
lot
there.
of action.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Something to be proud of.
Thank you. So you left active duty after 4 years, right?
I did 4 active years. It was funny. I enlisted. They give you a choice whether you're going to want to be stationed like overseas or East Coast or West Coast. And being from Nogales originally, I said, I want to go overseas or East Coast. And then West Coast was my last choice. So, of course, the Marine Corps sent me to Yuma, to the air station, to be stationed there. But I loved it. Yuma's
Yeah.
a great town. And,
It is. I like
so,
Yuma.
So, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then
How many years were you in Yuma?
Most of the 4 years. We were on detachment a lot. I was with a Harrier unit, so we would kind of come here and there. We spent time in Japan and Australia, in Nevada, in the deserts, California. So we were all over the place. But and we were stationed in Yuma that whole 4
Yeah,
years.
Yuma's good because they have the huge airport, the Marine base,
Right.
and the military base, and then they have a big another base where they do operations east of Yuma.
Right, the Yuma Proving Grounds.
Right.
So that's an Army station, and then the Marine Corps Air Station in Yuma is where I was stationed with Marine Attack Squadron 513, the Flying Nightmares, under some really high-quality people.
A lot of airspace there to work with since it's not a real heavily populated area.
Not only that, but the weather is very consistent, and that's one of the good things for getting a lot of fly time hours in, things of this nature. We had a couple of squadrons there that were just for training and things like that. The silent drill team, the Marine Corps silent drill team, and the Marine Corps band practiced there in the winter, in January, February timeframe, I think. So we'd see these guys out there with their rifles and doing their thing, and they were just young Marines like us. So we'd kind of give them a hard time sometimes.
Oh, good. So you served 4 years. You got that discipline. You got married.
Yep.
And you said, I'm going back to ASU to get the law degree.
To get my undergraduate.
Okay.
So I went back to ASU. I graduated from the Honors College, summa cum laude there, which is now called Barrett Honors College.
Okay. The business school then.
Well, the Barrett family helped sponsor what was the University Honors College.
Okay.
So it's also named for the secretary, but it was a little different back then than it is now. But so I graduated as an undergrad with honors, and then I went to law school in Denver at the University of Denver with the Sturm College.
Okay.
So I was up there for a couple of years.
You decided you wanted to practice law or at least be involved with the field of law, obviously.
Yeah, it was always something that intrigued me quite a bit, how, the idea of having this fight in a civilized way, right? Having this fight either on paper or making the argument in front of a judge or a jury very much intrigued me. I've always been a very competitive person.
Right.
And so I thought, what better place to go actually have a well-regulated, legitimate fight and do it in the law. So I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, interesting. So that led you back at that point to the state, and you had stints both with the county attorney and the attorney general. Maybe you can talk a little bit about those.
Right. Well, I was with the Denver DA's office under Bill Ritter, and Mona and I, my wife, were coming back from Glenwood Springs home to Denver, and we talked about, well, we're not really going home. We're coming back to Denver. And her folks live here in the Valley in Avondale. Right. My mom lives here in Phoenix. And so we said, look, we're going to start having kids and stuff, so let's move home. So that's what brought us home. And Rick Romley ended up hiring me there at the county attorney's office.
What year was that?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question.
90s, somewhere in the
Oh
90s.
no, this is into the 2000s already. 02, 03 ish.
Somewhere like that.
And then I was there for a short period of time, and then I went to work for Terry Goddard at the Attorney General's office. That was a great job. I was in charge of foreign prosecutions. So what I would do is build cases and take them into Mexican federal courts so we could prosecute the folks down there. So under the treaties, Mexico sometimes wouldn't extradite folks up to the United States to face justice.
Right.
But if we were able to find them, we would take the case down there and bring justice for the victims that had been victimized here, but do it down in the Mexican system. So really interesting, very unique work, but it was great. It was really
How many
interesting.
years did you work both for county attorney and attorney general? Total, how many years did you do that?
About 3 or 4 years total.
Right.
And then I left to do defense work, continuing to work, in the constitutional law area, right? The idea of due process, the idea of fighting that fight, working to find justice was always a big deal for me.
Yeah. So you left there and you went kind of into private practice.
I went into private practice, right? And I ended up working started in municipal courts. I've been down here to the Justice Court, down the block a couple times here in Chandler. Went to work in the Superior Court, and then I moved up into the Federal District Court, and I spent the last several years of my practice in Federal District Court, even getting to the Ninth Circuit a couple of times, which was really interesting to do oral arguments in front of a panel of judges in San Francisco. That was pretty interesting.
So you've had extensive legal work.
Yeah.
And at some point, you obviously had to get interested in politics because you're in a political office now. But you took that kind of a swivel from law to the recorders. But how did you end up getting involved politically, and what made you say, I'm going to run for recorder?
Well, interestingly, in the fall of 2013, I thought, gosh, I want to run for the House of Representatives. And so what I did was, opened up a little campaign, and we got going for about 6 weeks.
State House of Representatives.
State House of Representatives in my district in kind of the downtown Phoenix area.
Okay.
And we stopped that campaign because we had some business opportunities on the horizon that I wanted to dedicate myself to. And so I made a choice to go, more into the legal work, doing the business that we were looking at. But unfortunately, that deal fell through. Couldn't get back into the campaign thing. So I just stayed involved in politics at the party for a little while, kind of feeling it out. And then, March 22nd of 2016 happened.
Right.
And
that was the presidential preference.
That was the presidential preference election, and it just got me in my gut. And I thought, you know what, I've got to talk to folks about this and have this conversation about how important the vote is. I mean, we just saw in Virginia.
And just to refresh our audience's memory, that was where we had all those long lines. Everybody wanted to vote in the presidential preference, and it was a difficult situation at best.
I think that's a kind way to put it. Yeah, a lot of folks. And what got me was I was actually at one of the polling stations, and I watched people turn away after they'd waited a couple hours in line. I watched people like, I've got to go do my life. I've got to go get the kids ready for school or go to my next job or whatever. And, as is our right to speech and peaceably assemble and carry a firearm and pray, so too should our right be to vote, sacrosanct. Mm-hmm. And for those folks, it wasn't. And that really, really bothered me. And having spent so much time in the Marine Corps and prosecuting and doing some defense work, that's all I'd ever really fought for. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to fight for this, win or lose. And I didn't really expect to win. I tried.
Right.
And ultimately, thankfully, I did. But that's what motivated me.
So it was that event that kind of pushed. Did you have a contested primary?
No.
Or it basically got down to the general, and you ran against the incumbent, and who had been there a long time, and you won that election.
Right. And we had actually the incumbent hadn't had an opponent since 1988.
Wow.
So this was essentially a system of accountability without any accountability. There were no checks and balances along the way, which, I tell folks in my party all the time, shame on us for never having run anybody.
Right.
Shame on us for never having had that conversation and trying to hold the public official accountable, because that's what the system is supposed to be about.
It's true. It's
Yeah.
true. So the primary roles of the office, as I see it, are to ensure voter registration and elections go smoothly, but also to be the county's keeper of the public records.
Right.
Two monumental tasks. And I think everybody associates you with the elections because obviously that's on the forefront of everybody's mind.
Sure.
But also the keeper of the records is very important. And we'll talk a little bit about the keeper of the records. You got some good stories there, actually, because, yeah, people don't realize that. But let's talk first about your role in elections and some of the work you've done to make sure that that process goes smoothly,
Okay.
unlike it did in March of 2016.
Sure. Well, what I did when I first got into office, and actually a little bit before, was I as the lawyer that I am, I laid out the statutes and I thought, what is this job supposed to be about? What am I supposed to do? And then I talked to the folks who had been there. What lessons have you learned? What things do you know? What resources do you need? How can I, as the elected, help you do your job better? And that's the attitude I brought to the office. And so we had folks who had been thinking about this and thinking about that. And so we said, well, what are the pluses and minuses? And let's weigh this out. We looked at a lot of data. We looked at a lot of different practices around the country, best practices. And we said, okay, let's give this a shot and let's give that a shot. And they produced. And I'll tell you what, I have one of the best staffs as far as an election department goes in the country right now.
Right.
We established a new system for folks to check in that eliminates all the double voting issues. It eliminates the vast majority of provisional ballot issues, which used to be a big problem. It's a much faster way for folks to check in. It's much more secure in a lot of ways, and it's very accountable.
When you say check in, tell us what you mean.
So literally check in. When you walk into a polling place and you go to say, I'm here to vote, the system that we've created is a totally new system.
Okay.
Right? We had the architecture was building up in the heads of our IT department and elections guys. And we said, well, put it on a table in front of us and let's look at it. So they put example number 1 up and we tested it. We found flaws. We went to number 2. We tested it and we found flaws. We went to number 3. I think we're on version 7 or 8 right now. But because they knew what they were doing and they kept working at it and working at it and working at it, they made it better. And so when folks, we just did a bunch of surveys on the fall 2017 elections.
Right.
Those surveys are overwhelmingly positive. Folks really love the new check-in system. It wasn't hard to adjust to. It's very intuitive.
Right.
And so we were very excited about the product that our election department could put on the table in conjunction with the folks in our IT department. So that's one of the biggest changes that folks,
Right.
the voters, will see out there. But the reality is most of our voters vote by mail.
Right.
Maricopa County has one of the most robust permanent early vote lists in the country. And, more than 3/4 of our voters are always going to send their ballot in via the mail, or they can bring it in if they want to get a sticker.
Yeah.
So they're not really checking in per se at the polling place. That's a diminishing number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to reintroduce the show and we'll be right back.
Perfect.
I'm Mayor Jay Tipschreiner. You're watching Chandler Inside and Out today. In studio, Maricopa County Recorder, Adrian Fontes. Thanks for being here with us again today.
Thanks for having me.
So I vote by mail now. I for the longest time liked to walk in because I was usually in the race and it's kind of tradition.
Sure.
But percentage-wise, what's that number again that's voting by mail?
Depending on the race, we're above 80%.
Yeah.
Sometimes it dips below that, but that's usually when we have a lot of new folks registering who are not originally from here.
Right.
The longer people live in Maricopa County, the more they're going to vote by mail.
Yeah.
And that's just the preference of the vast majority of our voters. And not everybody wants to do that, like you had indicated. Some people just like going down physically, and that we're always going to have that available because let's say something happens with your ballot. You vote by mail now. Let's say your dog gets hungry and takes half of it for lunch or whatever.
Right.
You got to get a new ballot. We're going to have those facilities for you to come down.
Okay.
And so other voters also will have that capacity to come down and get a new ballot printed up.
Yeah, that's good. And it's always been interesting to me, as easy as it is to vote by mail,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of people that still don't vote. Of the people voting, you got 75, 80% voting by mail, but we still have a whole group of people that are not doing that. And I don't know the magic solution to that. I wish I did. But it's so easy to vote now, and
Yeah.
it's still we have to work on that turnout.
Well, like I was saying, alluding to a minute ago, the Virginia House of Delegates turned into a 50-50 House by one vote. Literally, they just did a recount.
Yeah, I heard
And
about that.
one of the parties was down by 10 votes. They did the recount, and it was one vote that shifted it over, that one race over, so that the whole House was a 50-50. So now the Virginia House of Delegates is an even split. And
That's like the House of Representatives here in Arizona.
that's exactly right. But it was one person's vote.
That just happened. I think
It
I just
just
heard about it
happened.
today or yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. It just happened. And so that in and of itself speaks to the idea that every single vote actually does matter. If that one person had decided not to vote, then it would be a different government.
Right.
The whole set
True.
of government in Virginia would be different. And that's the interesting thing to me is, folks, sometimes it's a complaint, sometimes it's a legitimate concern, sometimes they like what's going on, but regardless of where they're at on the opinion scale, by not participating, they're basically saying, you guys decide how it's going to go. Right? You're giving away your power by not voting, and that's one of the things that kind of, not unlike you, it's like I just kind of wonder about why folks don't participate more.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll have to work on that. We all have to work on that.
Absolutely.
So you made some changes at this last election in November of 2017 went really good, it sounds like.
I'll tell you what, we, for the first time in memory, we had 100% ballot accountability.
Yeah.
And that means every single ballot that came in had a signature verified envelope with it, and that's what we counted. Right. So regardless of the result, because I'm not really that concerned with,
because that's where you say sign the outside of your envelope before you mail it.
Right. And interestingly, you ask any of the security firms, private security firms, or anybody out there, the signature on that envelope is more reliable than having untrained people at the polling places check IDs, which I know is an issue. I don't know why it's an issue. I mean, we know what the stats are, we know what the numbers are, but that signature verification system, we've been using it here in Maricopa County for a long time. It's done us very well. And do we find problems? You bet.
Right.
We sent a couple of a small number, let's say, up for further investigation, and if something else happens, that's outside of my hands. But it's a secure system.
Very good. So we got that system. It seems to be working, which is great. Any things for the future you're looking at? Any changes or new?
Sure. The changes that we've made, I like to talk about elections as sort of like the front end and the back end, right? The front end is what voters see, how they interact when they go check in. The back end tends to be sort of the big machines we use for central count and a lot of the other ways that we take care of stuff on the inside that voters don't actually all the time get to see. So we've got some systems that are dated and that we're going to have to deal with over the next couple of years. But we've got the front end working really, really well now. So those are the big changes for voters. On the back end, we've got a little time to do some investigation, gather enough information, and then make some long-term choices on that side. Yeah.
During the election, one thing you talked about quite a bit was this needs to be a nonpartisan treated position. Why is that important to you?
Well, really, I see this more as a ministerial position. It's administrative. Right. I still think it ought to be an elected position, frankly. But look, I'm like an umpire. I'm like a referee. Right? I'm going to call balls and strikes. I'm going to try to make a system that works well. I think what we have to do is start really paying attention to elections as something different than politics. Okay? Politics is deciding who you're going to vote for. Elections is making sure that how you vote is accessible, it's secure, and it's accountable. Right? Those are the things that elections are supposed to be about, and that's the administration of election. Politics, great. Make up your mind. Go for this candidate versus that candidate. Let the election administration be neutral and be away from that. So that's why last session in 2017, I asked my representative, Ken Clark from Central Phoenix, to introduce legislation to make this a party-neutral office. And I haven't asked him yet. Maybe he'll see this first. I'm going to ask him to do it again. And hopefully we can get some support this time, and hopefully we can see that.
How would that work, that legislation? If enacted, how would it change the way the election?
There would be no party designation behind the candidate.
It'd be like a city council race. Our city council's not partisan.
Very much so.
Okay, I got you.
Very much so. And that to me is It's important. And, some people say, well, it's just window dressing. That's just this.
Right.
It's important, right? Because we've gotten so tribal in our politics on the politics side. But when you look at elections administration, this is a data-driven business. It's a budget-driven business. It is driven by the experience of the voter. And it doesn't matter who they're voting for. It matters that they're voting. And that's really what we'd like to see us move towards.
Okay. Well, we've talked a lot about elections. I want to talk
Yeah.
a little bit about record keeping. Because
Sure.
you are the keeper of the county records. So talk to us a little bit about that. Then maybe when we had met a couple of weeks ago, you had chatted about some unusual record keeping requests. But talk about the record keeping aspect of the county recorder's office.
Well, this office is, I think, one of the most interesting offices because it's the keeper of those two fundamental rights to a free people, right? The right to vote, which we've discussed, and the right to own property, the right to own real property. And that right is preserved through the record. Who sold it to whom over time? That's how you maintain those property rights. And so on that side of the house, we've done some innovating as well. We're going to be talking about new methods of storage in the next couple of weeks or months. I'm not really sure exactly when we're going to put that out, but we're really excited about the idea that when you record a document with my office, we're going to keep it in perpetuity, whether it has to do with land or something else that's very important. Let me give you an example. When I ended my enlistment in the United States Marine Corps, I brought my DD-214, which is that discharge paper, right down to the Maricopa County Recorder's office, and I had it recorded for free.
Right.
It's one of the benefits that you get as coming out of the military, and that's an important document because it helps show folks later on if you're going for VA benefits or for a VA loan for a house. You've got that on record forever. So any document that you want preserved in perpetuity,
Right.
if it falls within the statute of what we can take, we'll take it and we'll keep it forever.
Because in that instance, you could have kept it physically, but if you lost it or something, you'd have to go through all that rigmarole.
Fire, flood, earthquake, hurricane, theft,
Yeah.
you name it, could destroy it. And even if the document itself is destroyed, I still have a permanent record
Right.
at the Maricopa County Recorder's office. And the fun irony is it's now my office, which
Yeah.
is kind of cool. And I never would have thought that back in 96.
Because like in an instant like that, if somebody filed a document, they could always access that online, I would assume, or go down there and say, hey, I need to get a copy of this document.
Absolutely right. There's different ways that you can get the documents. You can mail in an order. You can come in and get a copy. You can order it online. And we can get those certified copies out to folks so that they can see that. And you had mentioned some of the other documents that we get,
Right. You got
like the
somebody-
fun stuff. Well, we've got chocolate chip cookie recipes. We've got lyrics to songs, old poetry. We've got some documents that I think are nowadays we might consider a little off color, but they're permanent documents in our records.
People just wanting to say, I'm going to file this so it's on record with some agency. I'm going to file my chocolate chip cookie recipe.
Yeah, and I think I kind of get a kick out of some of those. Now, some folks think that that's a waste or it's silly or whatnot, but the reality is that, there's, where do you draw the line, right? We have a system whereby these rights can be protected in perpetuity. And this is forever, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, the documents that we have, the records that we keep, when you come file something, we never get rid of it. So there are county recorders in the United States who have stuff going back hundreds of years. The Maricopa County Recorder has records going back to incorporation in 1871. We've got a brands book, which is a book of livestock brand for cattle or sheep or horses. And right now we've got it on loan to the State Department of Agriculture. They've got it on display. But we had that bound up, and it's in a really nice book because that's part of the history of it. In fact, it's funny because I have this really weird personal connection to property, I guess. When I first got elected, I was flipping through the first book, right? Book one, shelf number one, and there's a transaction for land, and the owner's name was Jose Maria Fontes, which I think may have been an ancestor of mine. I haven't checked that out yet. But the interesting thing is, you've heard of Fort Huachuca and the Huachuca Mountains down there. The first person to write that down in a European language was an ancestor of mine
Interesting.
who rode with the Spanish cavalry in the 1700s, 1770s. And he was the first one to write down that word, Huachuca.
Yeah.
So that idea of writing stuff down and keeping it in perpetuity is oddly gotten us where we're at and gotten me where I'm at.
It's
So
part of our history. It's
certainly part of our
record
history.
keeping of our history in a sense.
Yeah, and for me, those little personal connections make this very special. And I kind of geek out about it a little because it's fun, but it's important. It's
Right.
important to people to be able to preserve their rights, right, and say their piece. And that's what this office is about. And I take that real seriously.
Yeah, this has been educational. Any further comments for the watching audience or the viewing audience about the recorder's office?
Well, I'll tell you, the great emphasis that we have is make sure that your voice gets heard and your rights get preserved. And the only way that you can do that is making sure that you and everybody you know are registered and voting and engaged in our American democracy. This republic requires people, right? And the people out there are the ones that make it happen. So participate, register, and vote. That's all I can say.
Great. Well, thanks for coming out to Chandler today. We appreciate it. And for all your service to the county. We appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been a pleasure.
Great.
All right.
I'm Mayor Jay Tibshraeny. You've been watching Chandler Inside and Out today. Hope you enjoyed the program. Until we see you again, take care and be safe.